Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is a privilege to rise today, and I thought I'd start with a bit of a recap as to how we got to this place. I am a proud member of the Environment Committee, one of the few on our side that brings a heavy dose of common sense and rationality to a committee generally full of activists that care more about reducing emissions at all costs, regardless of economic growth. Now, we have for months been pushing to have this government release the economic and emissions reductions modeling to the committee, to Canadians. We have been stonewalled. On occasion, we've been able to make breakthroughs with our opposition partners. However, at the end of the day, the government has provided us nothing of what we have asked for. And in fact, as it relates to today's motion, I happened to have a meeting with the PBO's office just hours after he had appeared at the Finance Committee to discuss the change in the data that he was using for his economic modeling. And the government was freaking out about a so-called mistake, but the reality was that their data aligned completely with the government's. In fact, it was a secret hidden report that had been handed over to the PBO, but he was gagged. He was not allowed to hand over that Excel document that showed on a province-by-province, sector-by-sector basis what the financial implications to the Canadian economy were. So we move forward to today, where we are bringing forward this important motion, and the government decides that today is the day. I don't think without today's motion that they were going to release this data set that we have long been asking for. This data set that's raw data, that isn't convoluted and watered down and confused by liberal talking points. It shows, just as we have been saying, that the carbon tax is severely inhibiting our economic growth and is making Canadians poorer. The PBO has repeatedly stated that he is confident in the analysis that they had presented in the most recent report that shows that Canadians are worse off under the carbon tax because it aligns with this document. And we have been proven right today by the government finally relinquishing this data. It's absurd on so many levels. I have only been here just under a year, Madam Speaker, but to see the culture of secrecy, of hiding any pieces of information that don't fit the narrative of this government. Their hypocrisy knows no bounds. Let's recall, this was the government that was going to be open by default. They were going to usher in this new era of transparency in government. They were going to do things differently. But time and time again, they've failed to live up and in fact are getting worse. It seems as though every time there's a new scandal or a new cover-up, they say, hold my beer, I've got one better for you. And then today they come out and they want credit as heroes for releasing the information that was gathered and put together by taxpayer-funded bureaucrats that show that our economy is in fact worse off under their policy. And they have the gall to come out here and say, look at us, we're transparent, only because Conservatives brought forward today's motion. Now what the report shows, what the data shows, is that over $25 billion of our economic GDP will be lost by 2030 under their plan. And this doesn't, of course, include all of the other job-killing, radical policy ideas that this government has cooked up over the past 9 years that have destroyed economic growth in Canada. Not only has our GDP per capita declined in 4 consecutive quarters, but Statistics Canada just revealed that Canada's unemployment rate has also increased. In fact, for jobs to keep up with the population growth, Canada would have needed an additional 33,000 jobs in May, and we came nowhere near it. But meanwhile, the United States created 272,000 jobs within their economy, and our economy continues to fall behind. And there are warning signs all over the place as long as you're not willing to stick your head in the ground and ignore them. It's obvious that Canadians are struggling, that our economy is sluggish, if growing at all. This is, according to the Statistics Canada, the International Monetary Fund, reports that show just how perilous our falling GDP per capita numbers and problems truly are. We are experiencing the worst per-person income drop in the G7 over the last 5 years. The Americans' GDP per person has grown by more than 8% since 2019, while we have fallen. And if you compare yourself on a state-by-state basis, Canada ranks amongst the poorest states, including places like Alabama. Simply put, our economy is vastly underperforming our greatest competitor, our greatest neighbor, but most importantly, our most integrated trading partner. I wish I could show the chart that shows that growth here in the House, because it truly is staggering. And it's not surprising to see when that separation of GDP per person began. If our economy had simply grown at the average rate, Canadians would be $4,200 richer than this costly coalition has left them. And I think all of my colleagues, I can speak for myself certainly, when I talk to my friends, they know this. They recognize that they, despite having good jobs, are struggling. They're certainly not saving. They are simply falling behind. It's one of the steepest falls in standard of living in the history of our country. We are in a cost of living crisis. We can look at the cost of groceries. I assume all of us go to the grocery store. We see the same thing. Put yourselves in the shoes of people who are trying to support a family and understand the challenges that they are going through when they are choosing products, whether they're healthy or not, for their children in the grocery store each and every week. This Liberal NDP government's record deficits have driven interest rates sky high. And the dream of home ownership is simply dead for so many Canadians. Canadians are struggling to stay afloat. And what does this Prime Minister and his coalition partners do? They say 23% carbon tax hike. That's the anvil we're going to throw you. Sink or swim, good luck. Then, of course, there's the increase in the price of gas, of groceries, of home heating, and everything else. It all adds up, Madam Speaker. Millions of people in this country are using food banks each and every month. It is hardly the country that many of us recognize, and certainly not the one I grew up in. So in what crazy world does it make sense to raise taxes yet again on our job creators, on our students, on our families, on our seniors? There is a growing, and rightfully so, groundswell of support to scrap the carbon tax once and for all. From provincial Liberals, provincial NDPers, provincial Conservatives, and of course the federal Conservatives, we all recognize, as Canadians do, that a 23% carbon tax hike at a time of economic stagnation and for many devastation simply makes no sense. It lacks common sense. And let's not forget that as it relates to the carbon tax, there are over 130 First Nations in Ontario taking this Prime Minister and his government to court over that carbon tax. Now, it's obvious that in this chamber, we are the only party that will axe the tax, and boy, after the next carbon tax election, I can't wait for us to fulfill that promise. But every day, in the meantime, I am hearing from constituents, and I think all of my colleagues undoubtedly are. And if they are willing to say that their constituents aren't saying that they are frustrated, that they're tired, that they're feeling poorer, that they are divided, I simply don't believe them. This government needs to focus on job growth, on job creation and growth, putting criminals behind bars, reducing wasteful government spending that is driving up the debt in this nation and keeping our interest rates higher longer. The reality is, Madam Speaker, it's never been clearer, at least to me and I think to most Canadians, that we are in desperate need of a new government. We have had the worst growth in the G7, the worst in Canada's history since the Great Depression. Housing costs have doubled, rising faster than any other G7 nation. 76% of youth believe they will never own a home. And millions of people are going to food banks. This government has been sabotaging our economy by taxing farmers during a food crisis, by taxing home builders during a housing crisis, by taxing doctors away from our country during a healthcare crisis, and taxing small business, the backbone of our economy and our job creators, during an economic growth crisis. In fact, it was recently reported that over 120,000 people left this country. They emigrated to the United States because they saw a better opportunity, a government that respected individual freedom and their ability to drive prosperity for themselves, their family, and their communities. And I hate to say it, but right now it seems tough to be a proud Canadian. But I am not giving up, Madam Speaker. I am a proud Canadian. It was not like this 9 years ago. It will not be like this after the carbon tax election, because it's time to bring home the Canada that we remember, the Canada that we recognize, the Canada we want, and the Canada we deserve. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Lac St. Louis.
Speaker, I think it's very important to clarify something for the people at home. When we talk about requesting data from the government, we're not talking about hypersensitive data or national state secrets. We're talking about bits and bytes, Madam Speaker. We're talking about computer code, basically, not even an Excel spreadsheet, as the member from Kingston and the Islands has said. But the second point I'd like to make, or my question for the member is, the headline in the Globe just about an hour ago is, household wealth jumps to record on stock rally. Now, we have record household wealth, and we have a price on carbon, and we know the Conservatives love correlations. What does the member have to say about that correlation?
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisgard.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just first, in reference to my colleagues, the chair of our committee's comments regarding data, the file that was given to the PBO was an Excel document. And at that committee, we have been frustrated time and time again by a level of secrecy that is unheard of, a desire to hide every piece of evidence that doesn't fit with their priorities. But you're right. My colleague is right, Madam Speaker, through you. There have been people that have gotten a heck of a lot richer in this country. It's their friends, the liberal insiders, while the people across this country that are working hard, playing by the rules, are the ones that are suffering each and every day, and that's who we're going to fight for on this side of the aisle.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Vancouver East, a brief question.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The Conservatives, of course, they say that they are against the carbon tax. Now, last week, the NDP actually called on the big oil CEOs to committee to answer to Canadians about their corporate greed. And those CEOs told the committee that they support carbon pricing. And so the Conservatives spend so much time defending oil and gas industry. So why are they fighting against a policy that even the CEOs say is good for Canada?
Member for Portage-Lisgard, very brief answer.
I am happy to fight against crazy, radical policy ideas that will diminish our economic growth in this country. The fact that they view wealth creation as a bad thing, that jobs are a bad thing, I will stand up against that proudly every day in this chamber, Madam Speaker.